Not the phone call itself. Not what my son-in-law said. It was the silence right before he started talking, that 2-second gap where I could hear him breathing, that told me something was terribly wrong. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a high school principal in Dayton, Ohio. I have sat across the desk from grieving parents, furious teenagers, and school board members who wanted my head on a platter. I have had conversations that would make a grown man lose sleep for a week. I thought I had seen enough of life that surprises didn't come easy anymore. That Tuesday night in March changed my mind about that. Let me back up. Because to understand what happened that night, you have to understand the 6 months that came before it. My wife passed away 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. 16 months from diagnosis to the end. She was the kind of woman who made every room she entered feel smaller just because she filled it so completely with her laugh, with her opinions, with her absolute refusal to let anyone she loved feel alone. When she died, I rattled around our house in Dayton like a marble in a shoebox. My daughter and her husband had been trying to get me to move closer to them in Columbus for years. After her mother passed, she stopped asking and started packing my kitchen for me. I didn't fight her on it. Truth is, I was grateful. I moved into a small brick house on Fielding Drive, 12 minutes from their place, close enough to drive over for Sunday dinners, close enough to pick up the grandkids when school let out early, far enough that I wasn't in their business every day. My daughter was 38 that year. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's stubborn streak and a career she had built completely on her own. She managed compliance operations for a mid-size financial firm downtown. Her husband was a good man. Steady. Reliable. The kind of man who shows up with a toolbox before you finish asking for help. They had 2 kids, a boy who was 11 and a girl who had just turned 8. Sunday dinners at their house were the best part of my week. Around September, something shifted. I couldn't name it at first. My daughter still called. She still brought the grandkids over on Saturdays. She still laughed at my bad jokes the way she always had, slightly too long, the way you laugh when you love someone and you want them to feel funny. But there was something underneath, a tension she carried in her shoulders, a way she would glance at her phone when she thought no one was watching. I asked her once, in October, if everything was all right. We were sitting on my back porch. The kids were inside watching something loud on the television. She said, "Yes, Dad, I'm just tired. Work has been a lot." I nodded. I believed her, or I told myself I did. In November, she called and asked if I could come stay at their house for a long weekend. Her husband had a work conference in Cincinnati, and she said she just didn't want to manage the kids alone that week. Nothing unusual about the request. I packed a bag and drove over Thursday evening. Those 4 days were good. I cooked breakfast every morning. I helped my grandson with a history project on the Revolutionary War. My granddaughter made me sit through 3 episodes of some cartoon I didn't understand and then explained the entire plot to me with the patience of a saint. My daughter was there, present, laughing, but the phone check happened again. Every hour or so. Subtle. She thought I didn't notice. On Sunday evening, before I drove home, she hugged me at the door for longer than usual. I remember the hug specifically because my wife used to hug me like that, tight and quiet, the kind that means something you can't say out loud. I pulled back and looked at her. "You sure you're okay?" I said. She smiled. "I'm so glad you came, Dad." She didn't answer the question. I drove home. That was November. By March, I had convinced myself I was reading into things. She was fine. She was tired. She was a working mother of 2 with a busy life and an aging father who watched her too closely because he didn't have enough going on in his own days. I was the problem, not her. I had a quiet Tuesday that March. I made chili for dinner. I watched the news. I fell asleep in the recliner somewhere around 9 o'clock with a book open on my chest, which, at 63, is not embarrassing but simply the natural conclusion of a day well spent. My phone woke me at 11:47 p.m. It was my son-in-law. I answered half asleep. He said my name once and then stopped. That's when the silence happened. That 2-second gap. And I sat up straight in that recliner before he said another word, because the body knows things before the mind catches up. "She's okay," he said first. He said it the way people say things when they need you not to panic, which means the next sentence is something that should make you panic. "But you need to come," he said. "There are police at the house. I don't remember putting on my shoes. I don't remember getting my keys. I remember being in the car, reversing out of the driveway, the chili I made still sitting on the stove in a pot I had forgotten to cover. It was 38 degrees out. I was still in the flannel shirt I'd fallen asleep in. The 12 minutes to their house felt like 40. I turned onto their street and saw the lights from 4 blocks away, red and blue strobing against the bare trees, against the white aluminum siding of the houses, against the low winter sky. There were 3 police cruisers and what I would later learn was a detective's unmarked sedan. There was an ambulance. The ambulance doors were closed. There was yellow crime scene tape across the front porch. I parked behind a cruiser and got out, and a uniformed officer stepped into my path immediately. He had his hand up before I finished closing the car door. "Sir, I need you to stay back. This is my daughter's house," I said. My son-in-law called me. He asked for my name. I gave it. He spoke into the radio on his shoulder and waited. I stood on the cold sidewalk and looked at the yellow tape and tried to make my brain work properly. The ambulance was not moving. I didn't know what that meant. I told myself it could mean different things. My son-in-law came around the side of the house in a jacket he hadn't zipped. His face looked raw and gray, stripped of whatever expression people normally default to. He nodded at the officer, and the officer stepped aside and let me through. We stood on the lawn, under the bare oak tree that my grandkids used to hang a tire swing from before they decided they were too old for it. "Tell me she's inside," I said. "She's inside," he said. "She's talking to a detective. She's not hurt. The kids? Upstairs, asleep. They don't know anything happened." He rubbed the back of his neck. My neighbor texted me at the conference. I drove back as fast as I could. I got here about an hour ago. "Who was in the ambulance?" He looked at me for a moment. "A man," he said. "He came to the house tonight." I waited. "He had a gun," my son-in-law said. "My wife had one too. I had owned a firearm for 12 years, a .38 revolver. I kept in the bedroom safe after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood when I was still in Dayton. Responsible. Locked up. I knew my daughter knew how to shoot because her mother had insisted both of us learn after a colleague of hers was carjacked in a parking garage in '09. But I had no idea my daughter owned a gun. I had no idea there was a man who came to her house with one. "Who is he?" I said. My son-in-law shook his head. "Someone from her past. Before us. I don't know everything yet." He said the last part quietly, like the admission cost him something. I didn't ask more. I stood in that frozen yard and looked at the yellow tape on my daughter's porch and thought about the hug in November. The long, tight, quiet hug at the door. They let me go inside a few minutes later. The detective was a woman in her 40s. Dark coat, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She was sitting across the kitchen table from my daughter. My daughter looked up when I walked in. She had been crying not recently, but earlier. Her eyes were dry now, the skin underneath pink and tight. She was wearing the same gray cardigan she always wore when she worked from home. She had a mug of tea in front of her that looked untouched. She said "Dad" in a voice that came out small, and I crossed the kitchen and held her from behind, my hands on her shoulders, and I didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say that the holding didn't say better. The detective gave us a minute. She was decent about it. Her name was Detective Arroyo, and she explained to me, calmly, what she could tell me at that stage of the evening. A man had come to the house. He and my daughter had a confrontation inside the front hallway. A weapon had been discharged. The man was alive. He was on his way to Grant Medical Center. His condition was serious. My daughter had already provided a statement. She was not under arrest. She was not being charged with anything at this time. The investigation was ongoing. I sat down at that kitchen table across from my daughter after the detective stepped outside to take a call. My son-in-law stood by the refrigerator with his arms crossed, not because he was angry, but because he didn't know what to do with his hands. "Tell me," I said to her. She wrapped both hands around the mug. She looked at the table. "It started 2 years ago," she said. His name was a name I won't say here. My daughter had known him in her late 20s before she met her husband. They dated for about a year. When she ended it, he accepted it at first. Then he didn't. There was a period, she said, about 4 months where he would show up at her apartment, at a restaurant where she went with friends. She filed a police report once, she said, but nothing came of it. Then he stopped. She moved on. She met her husband. She built her life. He came back into her life 18 months ago with a LinkedIn message. Professional, polite. Said he was just checking in. She didn't respond. Then a Facebook message. Then a message through her firm's general contact page. Then one day in September, I thought she walked out to her car in the parking garage at work and found a note under the windshield wiper. I didn't want to scare you, she said, not looking at me. Any of you. She had not told her husband. She had not told me. She had gone, alone, to a county courthouse and filed for a protective order in October. The order was granted in November. I thought about November again. The weekend I came to stay. The Sunday hug. The order, she told us, didn't stop him from parking 2 blocks away from her office. Didn't stop the emails from different addresses. Didn't stop the feeling, she said, of never being entirely sure he wasn't somewhere nearby. She had obtained her carry permit in January. She had taken the classes. She kept the gun in the nightstand because when her husband traveled, she could not sleep without knowing it was there. That Tuesday night, the kids had gone to bed at 9. She was working at the kitchen table. At 11:15, the doorbell rang. She didn't go to the door immediately. She looked out the upstairs window first. She saw him standing on the porch. She called 911 and told me she stayed on the line with the dispatcher. The dispatcher told her to stay inside, lock the door. Officers were on the way. He didn't wait for the officers. She said he came through the front door. She said he had always known how to open that lock. They had lived together briefly, and he had never given back the key. And she had changed the locks twice, but he had found other ways. She said she met him in the front hallway. I'm not going to describe what happened next in detail, because I don't think it's mine to tell in detail. She told me what I needed to know. The police would establish the rest. What I will say is that the dispatcher heard everything. The 911 recording existed. The protective order existed. The notes, the messages, the parking garage incident, she had kept all of it in a folder in her email, methodically, the way her mother would have kept receipts. My daughter was organized even when she was afraid. The man survived. He was in surgery for several hours that night, and he came through it. He was charged, once he recovered sufficiently, with aggravated burglary, violation of a protective order, and felonious assault. My daughter was not charged with anything. The county prosecutor's office reviewed the case and concluded she had acted in lawful self-defense within her own home. Ohio has a castle doctrine. Detective Arroyo explained it to us 3 times, patiently, until my son-in-law stopped asking her to explain it again. The man pleaded no contest 7 months later. He received a sentence of 8 years. With good behavior, he would be eligible for early release after serving approximately 6. I keep track of that number. I will keep tracking it. What happened after that night is harder to explain than the night itself. The night, at least, had a sequence. There were events and then other events. There were things that happened that I could arrange in order and follow to their conclusion. What came after had no such shape. My son-in-law and my daughter went through several weeks where they barely spoke to each other, not because of anger, exactly, but because she had kept something enormous hidden for 18 months and neither of them knew how to stand next to each other with that much unspoken between them. I watched it happen from 12 minutes away. I brought food on Wednesdays. I took the grandkids to school on Thursdays. I mowed their lawn in April because the grass had grown long and nobody had noticed. He told me one evening on my back porch, we had started sitting out there on Wednesdays after I dropped the food off, that he understood why she hadn't told him. He said, she was protecting us. He held his coffee cup with both hands the way she held her tea mug that night, and he stared at the yard, and he said, I know she was protecting us. I just don't know how to not feel like I failed her when she felt like she had to do that alone. I didn't have a good answer for him. I had spent 4 months asking myself a version of the same question. I had been 12 minutes away. I had been at the house for 4 days in November. I had looked her in the eyes and asked if she was okay and accepted the answer she gave me. What kind of father does that? What kind of father misses something that large? I talked to my grief counselor about it. I had been seeing her since my wife died. She told me that my daughter had gone to considerable effort to make sure no one close to her could see what was happening. That protection was intentional. That my not knowing was not evidence of my failure but of her determination to handle it herself. The counselor said it gently and said it twice, and I nodded both times and did not entirely believe her either time, but I kept the thought and returned to it when I needed to. My daughter started therapy in April. Real therapy, twice a week, a specialist in trauma, a woman whose office was on the 3rd floor of a building on High Street. My daughter told me about it matter-of-factly one Sunday, the way she always reported practical information. "I'm doing this. It's helping. You don't need to worry." She had her mother's manner of stating things as settled before they were fully settled, so you understood from her tone that the conversation about whether it was a good idea had already happened internally, and the conclusion had been reached. My grandson was 12 by summer. He didn't know the details. We had decided that together, all 3 of us adults. But he was 12, and he was smart, and he had been home the night it happened, asleep upstairs, and he had woken up to police in his house and his mother at the kitchen table. He knew something had happened. He had become quieter in the months after, more watchful. He started asking if he could walk his mother to her car in the parking garage at work on the days he was with her downtown. He was 12 years old, and he was walking his mother to her car. I took him to baseball games that summer, Columbus Clippers, cheap seats, hot dogs, the whole thing. We didn't talk about it. We talked about pitching mechanics and the designated hitter rule and whether the Nachos were better at Progressive Field in Cleveland. But I think just being somewhere where nothing required anything from him did something for him. He started to loosen, gradually, the way a muscle you've been holding too tight finally lets go. My granddaughter never knew anything unusual had happened. She was 8. She was concerned primarily with her hamster, and whether she could get a second hamster, and what she would name the second hamster if she got one. I hope she carries that obliviousness with her for as long as possible. There is no rush for the world to show her what it contains. My son-in-law and my daughter started marriage counseling in June. They told me together at Sunday dinner. They said it the way people announce something they've decided they're proud of, which is the right way to announce it. He reached over and held her hand on the table when he said it. She let him, which told me something. I drove home that Sunday night in the dark and sat in my driveway for a few minutes before going inside my little house on Fielding Drive. The porch light was on because I always left it on when I went out. The chestnut tree in the front yard had started to bud. I had been in that house for almost 3 years, and I still thought sometimes, when I pulled into the driveway, about how I had not wanted to move here. How it had felt like retreat. Like an ending. I thought about my wife. I thought about her specifically in the context of all of this, what she would have done if she had been alive these past 2 years, whether my daughter would have told her, whether that one phone call to her mother might have changed the 18 months that followed. I don't have the answer to that. No one does. Grief has a way of mixing itself into everything else that happens in a life, coloring things you can't fully separate from the loss. What I know is that my daughter is here. That matters more than anything else. I also know that I spent a long time after that night being angry at myself for not seeing it. I've spent longer working on setting that anger down. Not because I think I should be absolved, I'm not sure absolution is the right frame for it, but because the anger was making me watch her differently. Too carefully. Too anxiously. And she didn't need a frightened father. She needed the father I had always been, steady, present. Someone who shows up with food on Wednesdays and doesn't ask more than she's ready to give. I am still working on the balance. Last October, so about 19 months after that night, we all went to Hocking Hills for a long weekend. My daughter and her husband and the kids and me, in a rented cabin with a fireplace and a porch that looked out over a creek. My granddaughter brought the hamster. She had gotten a second one. She named them both. The first evening we sat on that porch after dinner, the 5 of us plus 2 hamsters in a travel cage, and the creek was running low and the trees were at full color orange and amber, and that particular shade of red that Ohio produces in October, like it's apologizing for all the gray months ahead. My grandson was telling some long, complicated story about something that happened at school, and my granddaughter kept interrupting to correct details he was getting wrong. And my son-in-law was laughing, and my daughter was sitting next to me with her feet up on the railing. She said, quietly enough that just I could hear her, "Thanks for not hovering, Dad." I said I didn't know what she was talking about. She bumped her shoulder against mine. "Yes, you do." I looked at the creek. "Your mother would have hovered," I said. She laughed. A real one. The kind I hadn't heard enough of in the last 2 years. Mom would have hired a private investigator and published the findings. She would have prepared binders, I said. Color-coded. We sat there for a while after that, just listening to the kids bicker about the story and the water moving over the rocks and the first few evening insects starting up. The hamsters rustled around in their cage. The fireplace light came through the cabin windows and fell in orange rectangles on the porch boards. I thought about the Tuesday night in March, the red and blue lights 4 blocks out, the crime scene tape, standing on that frozen lawn under the oak tree with my son-in-law while my flannel shirt let in the cold. I thought about the Sunday in November, the hug that meant something she couldn't say out loud. I have replayed that hug many times in the last 19 months. What I would have done differently if I had pushed harder, asked again, stayed one more day. The replaying doesn't change anything. But I think I finally understand what she was doing when she hugged me like that. She was telling me she was glad I was close. She was telling me she was holding something alone, and she was tired of it. She was telling me, the only way she allowed herself to tell me, that she needed me nearby. 12 minutes is close enough. I retired at 61, thinking I had done the important work of my life. 31 years of keeping other people's children safe, building something that would last past me, sending kids out into the world better than they came in. That felt like the work. I thought what came next was just maintenance, mow the lawn, see the grandkids, don't fall apart without her mother. I was wrong about that. What came after retirement is still work, different work. The work of staying present with people who need you to be there without needing anything from them. The work of sitting on a porch in October and listening to your grandchildren argue and letting that be enough. The work of driving 12 minutes in a flannel shirt at midnight when your son-in-law calls and says the 2 seconds of silence that mean everything is wrong. That's the work that's left. I'm still doing it. My granddaughter asked me last month if I was going to move again someday. I asked her why. She said she just wanted to know how far away I was going to be. I told her I wasn't planning on going anywhere. She nodded, very seriously, like I had provided the correct answer to an important question, and then asked if I wanted to meet the hamsters properly because she didn't think I had really met them. I had just seen them, and those were different things. She is 8 years old, and she is entirely correct. I met the hamsters. I'm 12 minutes away. That's where I'll stay.